You need a sewing machine. I'm sorry. Are you shitting me? Hi everybody, welcome back to my craft room. Today, I'm doing something a little different. Usually, it's me making a cosplay. But today, I want to talk about you making a cosplay.
Hi, this is Editing Emily popping in to say that my autofocus went absolutely haywire, and I do apologize. It is extremely distracting.
If you want to start getting into making your own cosplays, it can be really intimidating, even for me. I've been cosplaying for 11 years, and when I look at content online, there are people that have been doing this for so long and work with so many innovative and incredible materials that sometimes it's intimidating. I wanted to recommend some tools that might be useful to you if you are wanting to get into making your own cosplays. I've compiled 2 lists. The first list is stuff that I think is good for beginner cosplayers, anybody who's trying to get into making. And the second list is more extra things if you're a little more advanced and want to be just a little more extra. If you have been cosplaying for long enough and you feel like this is something you want to have more tools to just make stuff. Oh, and there's a third bonus list of stuff you don't have to have, but nice to have, but it's expensive. So that'll be at the end. Couple things before we get started. First, you're gonna hear me mention some stores and brands, not because I am sponsored, but because I want to point you in the right direction. I don't want to send anybody on a wild goose chase Googling trying to find stuff. Second is just be aware of your own finances. Just because you hear me recommend something doesn't mean you have to go out and buy it, and it doesn't mean you have to buy all of this stuff right away or at all. Cosplay is kind of inherently an expensive hobby. It comes with a lot of tools and materials, wigs, makeup, convention badges. It's expensive. There are, of course, ways to do it cheaper, and I'll mention some of those ways, but overall, just be responsible with your money and take what you want from this and leave the rest, is essentially what I'm saying. So, let's start with some beginner sewing tools. The first is a sewing machine. If you want to start making your own cosplays by hand, you need a sewing machine. I'm sorry. Are you shitting me? Great, off to a good start. I don't even know how this looked. It's probably fine. Anyway, I was saying, there are a lot of really cool historical costumers who hand sew all of their cosplays using historical techniques. If you do that, you can. I think you're gonna burn out. Hand sewing, while you do need to learn to love it as a cosplayer and sewist, it can be very time-consuming and challenging. And I think especially as a beginner, it's important to take on projects that you know you can accomplish in a pretty reasonable time frame so you don't get frustrated and stop. The good news is buying a sewing machine does not need to be expensive at all. In fact, I would not recommend buying a sewing machine new. Go look at thrift stores, look on Facebook Marketplace. Maybe your grandma has one she hasn't used in a while. Older sewing machines actually do tend to be better than a lot of the newer ones that come out. Not all of them, but a lot of them are great. And really when you're starting out, all you super need is a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch anyway. On top of a sewing machine, you are gonna need some hand sewing supplies. You're gonna need, at the very least, some hand sewing needles. Almost every garment you make is going to have hand sewing involved in some capacity, whether that's putting on a button, finishing a hem, even basting a zipper before you sew it. It's a very needed skill to have. So get some hand sewing needles, look up some stitches, and practice them. An iron and an ironing board. I cannot stress this enough. Ironing is one of the most important things you can be doing when you are sewing. You need to iron every single one of your seams. If you sew a seam, you need to press it. It's gonna make everything fit better, it's gonna make everything look nicer. Even if you're buying your cosplays, get an iron because you were going to want to iron the wrinkles out of your cosplay. Pins and clips. Pins are really nice because they are going to hold all of your fabric together while you're sewing. You can use clips. Clips are kind of an extra, I think. They're not super necessary, but I like them if I'm working with a fabric that can't self-heal, so like a vinyl. The next thing you're gonna need is a good pair of fabric scissors. Now listen, you're gonna get the fabric scissors. You are going to cut only fabric with them. No paper, no plastic, fabric. Sewing shears are kind of a consumable. You will eventually need to replace them, but they last a long time. The last pair I got it in 2015, and I've only just recently had to replace them. Your machine will come with a little thread cutter on the side of it, but it's really nice to have a small pair of thread snips to keep right by your machine to just cut the threads as you go. You're gonna wanna trim any extra long threads. It's gonna make your cosplay look really neat and tidy. Your sewing area is gonna be covered in a lot of thread though. So I would also recommend a lint roller. And last on the beginner sewing tools, you're gonna want some measuring implements. Something like a quilting ruler, a measuring tape, a seam gauge. They all come in extremely handy. And this is a good time to mention Wawak, which is a really great resource if you are sewing. Wawak has been in business for a long time, and they sell things like thread and zippers and scissors and irons, all much cheaper than you can typically get them at your local giant retail craft store. So keep that in mind if you need to purchase some stuff. Next is beginner crafting. So this is all the stuff that I think you need for cosplay that doesn't really fit into the sewing category. It's like everything else. Hot glue, don't let anybody tell you that it isn't God's gift to cosplayers, because it is. People will try to say hot glue is like lazy, and can it be? Sure, but like who cares? It's also just a really great adhesive to have around. It cools really fast, so it can bond things quickly, and you know, it creates a really strong hold on a lot of materials, so I would really recommend getting yourself a nice glue gun. Next, you're gonna want some cutting implements like a box cutter or an exacto knife. I'm more of an exacto knife person because I feel like you can get it a little more precise, but a box cutter is also great. Next, you're gonna want some regular scissors that you're gonna use on your paper, your foam, your plastics, whatever else that's not fabric, once again. Next is a heat gun. A heat gun is really useful if you want to start working with foam or even Worbla. Go to the Harbor Freight and get yourself the cheapest heat gun you can find. You're gonna want some paint brushes. Just the cheapy synthetic ones from Michaels are gonna do you just fine. They don't have to be very fancy, but likely you are going to be painting some stuff. Next is a styrofoam wig head. Wigs are a really big part of cosplaying, and it's not impossible to style on your own head, but it's really hard. So having something that can act as your own head while you're styling is absolutely invaluable. They're super cheap. I have found them at pretty much every craft store I've ever been to. You can also go to places like Sally's Beauty Supply, and if you're in the US and Canada, they have the styrofoam wig heads and a little stand that you can attach to your desk. You're gonna want one of those too. And with that, you're gonna want some basic wig styling tools as well, things like shears and thinning shears, and maybe a razor, bobby pins. It kind of depends on what kind of wigs you're trying to style. I am not super experienced with wigs, so I don't use a ton of stuff, but having something like a crimper if you're trying to do a really intense anime style, or a straightener. If you want to be able to learn to do more intense wig styling, getting the proper tools is gonna help you so much. And that's the end of the just beginner list of things. So now we're gonna get into some more of the advanced stuff, starting with sewing. A rotary cutter and a rotary mat have been really game-changing for me sewing-wise. A rotary cutter is basically a fabric pizza cutter. It's super sharp, so be careful. And the mat is something you can use the rotary cutter on, and it self-heals. Another nice thing about the cutting mat is you can use like a box cutter and exacto knife on it, and it's gonna protect your tabletop, or if you're like me, a little carpet goblin, because I cut all my fabric out on the floor. Pinking shears are really nice, and they're pretty inexpensive. They just have a serrated edge, so when you cut your fabric, it prevents it from fraying, and it can be really handy if you're trying to like turn a corner, because it just gets rid of so much excess fabric. The next thing that is nice to have is a dress form. I actually have two. I have one that's adjustable, and I have one that is just a foam pinnable one. Neither one of them are perfectly shaped to my body, but they can be a really handy base if I'm drafting something, or if I need to hand sew something to a cosplay, and it's easier if it's like on a body. So if you have the space for one and you're a little more advanced in cosplay, I would really recommend a dress form. Alternatively, you can make your own dress form. There's a ton of tutorials and even companies that sell sewing patterns out there, so do a little bit of research and see kind of what's gonna work best for you. And then the last thing in the sewing category is a tailor's ham. A tailor's ham, I actually have it right here on the floor. It's just a little ham. You use it when you're pressing curves or sleeves, and it's just really handy. Not 100% necessary, but kind of nice. Woo. Oh, now getting back into the crafting for the more advanced crafter. A canvas wig head. I really like my canvas wig head. It is great. You can measure your own head. You can buy one that fits the size of your head. It's fully pinnable. It's a lot sturdier than a styrofoam one. And it is just a joy to style wigs on. Next is a steamer, and steamers are super useful. They're great for not only steaming your cosplays, but also styling wigs because they just create a really nice even heat around the fibers so you can shape them with relative ease. A respirator. If you take anything from this list, please let it be a respirator. If you're working with anything like resin, contact cement, anything that emits fumes, you have got to get a respirator. If you are heating up PVC pipe with a heat gun, you need a respirator. People use a lot of chemicals in cosplay, and the chemicals are really useful. The chemicals are great, but you have got to be safe when working with the chemicals because you do not want to develop an allergy or contact dermatitis or, heaven forbid, like a lung issue because you were breathing in literal poison in the name of cosplay. Please get a respirator. Anyway, next is gonna be a rotary tool. You've probably heard of Dremel's. Dremel's just the name brand rotary tool. Mine's from Harbor Freight. Harbor Freight is usually the cheapest option for any sort of power tool. It works great, I like it. In fact, if you need any sort of power tool for cosplay, check Harbor Freight. It's probably gonna be cheap. And last on the crafting list is an airbrush. I personally do not own an airbrush. It is my next big cosplay purchase. And I'm really excited to get one because you can do a lot more controlled painting with it, and I think that's gonna be a really nice upgrade. So now we get to the completely optional tools for both sewing and crafting that are nice to have, but not 100% necessary. You don't have to have these if you're cosplaying. First is a serger, and I will say, I am a ride or die girly for my serger. You either love sergers or you hate them. I love them. A serger is kind of like a sewing machine, but it has 4 threads and it has a blade that cuts the fabric as you sew. It's great for finishing off your seams, and it's also awesome for stretch fabric. I do have some bad news, and it's that my philosophy for buying a serger is not the same as my philosophy for buying a sewing machine. I think you should invest in a nicer serger. My serger has an air thread mechanism, which is really nice. It's a Baby Lock Imagine. I got it from my parents. I'm very lucky that they gave it to me. It's my baby, it's my pride and joy. I use it on every single project. And if you can find one secondhand with like an air thread mechanism, that's great. And I think you should get that because trying to thread a regular serger, I've done it twice, it's not fun. It's not fun. Next is a 3D printer. I have a 3D printer. It is an Ender 3 V2. I like it pretty well. It's been a really good tool for making props. I think a lot of time 3D printing is presented as like an easier option, and I wouldn't say it's like easier than sewing. It's not. So I don't want to scare you away from them. I really do like mine, and I use it a lot. I'm using it right now to print my alloy spear, but they are not like a magic tool. And that's okay. Most tools are not. Next is specialty foam cutters. These are nice because they're a little cheaper, but if you're working with a lot of foam, the ones I have are from Foamworks, and I have like a circle cutter and a bevel cutter, and they're really handy just when you want to cut foam with a little more precision, especially the circle cutter. Love it. Next is a craft cutter like a Cricut or a Silhouette. I don't have either of these either. I haven't really felt the need to get one for the types of things I cosplay, but if you're cosplaying something like Genshin Impact or Honkai Star Rail, pretty much any Hoyoverse IP, you should, I don't know, maybe you don't have to, but I would not attempt any of those cosplays without some sort of Cricut or Silhouette. I personally don't have a recommendation for what one you should buy. It kind of just depends on your software preferences. That is one that you are gonna wanna consult the internet on. Next is an embroidery machine. My friend Alex has an embroidery machine, and we used it a lot when we made our Sakizo cards cosplays. Also something that require some maintenance and some knowledge, but that's great. It's really cool that cosplay gives you the opportunity to learn so many new things. And last is a laser cutter. I do not own a laser cutter, and I feel like if you're thinking about purchasing a laser cutter, you are a much more advanced cosplayer than I am. Anyway, that's my list. That's my advice for if you want to get into cosplaying and making your own cosplays. I find making my own cosplays extremely fulfilling, and I hope that that is something that you can get into as well. If you have any questions or if I missed something on the list, feel free to put it in the comments below. And if you want to find what I'm working on, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. That's it. I'll see you next time. Bye!